Verse 194. It is not by the philosophers, not by the Buddhas, not by myself, not by anybody else, but by causation that being obtains. How can one talk of non-being? Previous verse, which I covered in the previous video, was having a go at philosophical speculation. Those who are lost in the study of the Buddhist texts. And this verse and the next couple of verses, I think are directed at a particular kind of debate that might have been going on. But let's not worry too much about that. Let's just see how we can make use of these verses. So this verse is about causation, being and non-being. And first of all, I suspect that this word philosophers refers to a rather more potent figure than we might understand by the English translation. A being of power of some sort, perhaps a siddha. But never mind that. The point here is that we're being told that being arises because of causation, which seems a pretty straightforward statement. Everything arises because certain conditions give rise to them. Cause and effect, isn't it? When certain conditions are in place, a certain circumstance comes into being. A certain effect arises. So that seems straightforward. And then we're asked, how can one talk of non-being? So there's a certain assumption here, and it's a spiritual cliche that you hear often spouted to the effect that everything is delusion, the world is an illusion, it doesn't really exist. The truth of the matter is non-being. So this verse is having a little go at that. There is being, there is all this, it's come into existence, it's arisen because of certain conditions. So how can we say it's not real or it doesn't really exist? That's what this verse is saying. And like I said, it seems quite straightforward, doesn't it? But if we look back to verse 85, which I covered in video 63, which I've entitled Causation. If I've done the index by then, you can look it up. Nothing whatever is born or ceases to exist by reason of causation. So this verse is saying the opposite. Nothing is born, in other words, there's no being by reason of causation. And verse 195 is telling us the opposite. So there's a little bit of sorting out to do here, a little bit of clarification. And the next two verses go about this. Let's look at the next verse, 195. When being obtains by causation, who can bring about non-being? By reason of the wrong views based on the doctrine of birth, being and non-being are discriminated. So, if everything arises because of certain conditions, we cannot deny the reality of the world. We cannot say it's illusion or delusion or doesn't really exist. What this verse is telling us is that by reason of the wrong views based on the doctrine of birth, we discriminate into being and non-being. We discriminate into the arising and disappearance of things entities, events. The point is that being, what is not what it appears to be. Verse 85 told us, when causation is discriminated, there is birth and cessation. When you think in terms of causation, then you're thinking in terms of being and non-being, birth and dissolution. The point is, we have a certain attitude to the world, a certain relationship with it. We assume, we strongly believe that it's always been there, that things come and go within it, that we ourselves come and go within it, that the world is like the external stage, with all of us actors coming and going on it, strutting our stuff for a short period of time before we exit. But when we've stumbled upon the true nature of our own awareness and realised how everything depends upon it, then there's a fundamental shift. This is the beginning of our enlightenment practice. And verse 196 points this out. When it is realised that there is nothing born, nothing passing away, there is no way to admit its being and not being. The world is to be regarded as quiescent. So happily we can then forget about all this way of thinking, about causation, about being and non-being. This statement, the world is quiescent, is rather a nice way of looking at it. It gives it a certain homogeneity. We can label it, stamp it as quiescent, just as we stamp all the experiences we have in our sleep as dream. We can write it off as dream. We can write off all these experiences as dream and not let them bother us. We can put a similar label on the world. We can call it samsara. Label it as such and put it behind us. In this way it becomes quiescent, and we rest in our own sense of being. We rest in the reality of our own awareness. We step outside. Even though we're still active, we still engage. Fundamentally we've stepped outside. This is what we do as enlightenment practitioners. We keep coming back. We keep stepping outside the world. We realise its dreamlike nature. We realise that causation, which is essentially about giving it a sense of continuity and permanence, is simply a fabrication of consciousness. It's a discrimination. It's a discrimination by which we see things coming and going. And we're not concerned with the conventional teachings which say it's all illusion and that non-being is the reality. I think these verses are also relating to the impression that Buddhism is somehow nihilistic, that somehow it stresses non-being over being. But here in these verses it's quite clear. It stresses neither. Its attitude is that the world is to be regarded as quiescent.